Hello, and welcome to Sunday at Bear Branch, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. We are now rebroadcasting the morning sermon of Brother Brian Barrett, who preaches for our congregation here at Bear Branch in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We hope that you will find the lessons profitable in the study of God's Word and enlightening to the Christian walk. Brother Barrett has been a preacher and teacher in the Churches of Christ for over 40 years, a frequent speaker in gospel meetings, revivals, having worked in TV and radio, and now our internet ministry. We now invite you to open your Bibles and follow along in our lesson of the hour. Now, here's Brian.
We have been talking about various principles that we need to be developing in our lives to prepare ourselves for the life which is yet to come. And one of the main statements we're making, is that, just like you wouldn't give a 5-year-old the keys to your car to drive down to the playground, as we mentioned last week, don't expect God to give you access to a body that's eternal in nature and much more capable than the body we have now if you're not prepared to handle it. And if we're not prepared to handle it, sadly to say, we probably won't find ourselves in paradise, and we won't find ourselves passing through the judgment of God. And it is that important, these things that we're talking about. Today, as we look into the book of Titus, I want to think about the things that we have discussed, the fruit of the Spirit, rejoicing in the Lord and thinking on those things that we have discussed. If you be risen with Christ, and a lesson more and more, each one of those, they all fit together. And I want to talk today under the subject of the power of a good example. And we might say the power of a good adult example. In the book of Titus, when Paul is writing to him in Titus 1, he speaks in verse 10, "For there are many unruly and vain talkers, and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth." Paul makes it clear to Titus that the world has no place in the church. Worldliness has no place in the church, and it has no place in the heart of a Christian. Living based on our lusts and our desires, our wants, puts us in a position where, in essence, we turn from the truth. That's the bottom line. Doesn't matter whether we're following Jewish fables or Gentile fables or whatever it is that is commanded by men. The bottom line is, if we follow that type of lifestyle, we are turned from the truth. And based on that principle or that precept, the Apostle Paul starts what we know as the second chapter with this little 3-letter word, but. There are those who follow the commandments of men. There are those who follow after the Jewish fables. There are the things that the Cretans themselves, the way they live, the way they act, doing things just for their own benefit, whether it's financially or otherwise. But, and I'm going to say this morning, the church needs taken to the woodshed. The church has not lived up to its obligations. It has failed miserably in setting good examples for both the younger Christians coming up, for those who are lost outside in the world. We have done a miserable job in the church, and we're paying a terrible price for it because we're losing our young people, and the ones that we're even close to keeping are filled with more worldliness than ought to be there. As adults, we have set terrible examples as husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, employees and employers. The old statement used to be that, people would like to see a sermon rather than to hear one any day. And that the first Bible that most people ever read is a faithful Christian living a Christian life. But the church today is in a position where we can't find elders. And I've said this for years, and nothing's really changed. Few men qualify for the office of an elder. And in most places, it's like fitting a square peg in a round hole, or vice versa. They keep forcing it until they can get somebody to fit in there, even though they don't belong there. In the Christian families, the divorce rate is equal to, and in some places probably even surpasses, that of the world. When it comes to husbands understanding their responsibilities, failure. Wives understanding their positions, failures. The church should get an F. The time to fix that is before the day of judgment. Before we have to stand before Christ and give an account of the things done in this body. When Paul was telling Titus, he said, but it's time to fix it. People may live on their own lust. They may have followed fables and commandments of men. They may have lived like the rest of the world, but now's the time to fix that. And if we don't, we're going to have to answer for it. And the problem that we have today is few young men and few young women have anybody they can respect as Christians to follow in their footsteps. And sadly, the ones they follow are not biblically clear and clean in their walk and add to the confusion. Husbands and wives and their relationship have not set the example to their children. A 2-year-old child knows how mommy or daddy respect one another and how they behave. If daddy says something and mommy fights back with him, they learn. These little children, by the time they reach the age of kindergarten, already know pretty much what it means to be a mommy and a daddy from a basic standpoint. If mommy doesn't listen to daddy, I don't have to either. If daddy and mommy fuss all the time, I can fuss too. Children are really good at figuring things out. But the fact is, Paul tells Titus, you can still speak the things that become sound doctrine. Last week we were talking about the fact that you ought to be doing certain things, and if you're not doing those things, you ought to be, and so you're going to be held responsible for that. We're going to be held responsible for that. We have to have people who are setting good examples. And that's exactly what Paul tells Titus here. The only way to fix this starts with the older men and the older women and trickles down to the younger men and the younger women and to the church community as a whole. He speaks first to the aged men, the older men. You're setting the example. I'm setting the example. We're setting the examples. The way we look at church, the way we prepare for church, we got to go to church. It's the attitude that we have all the time. We're always being watched by somebody. Our children, our husbands, our wives, we're always being watched by the world around us. And they're trying to figure out what it is that's so special about Christianity that they want to be a part of it. Because sadly, what they see is they really don't have much to say for my family because most of their families are all messed up anyway. Now, there are examples worthy of imitating, and again, we ought to do just that. We ought to look for the best and the good examples, and we ought to point to them. And we also need to acknowledge our failures. Parents driving home talking about, the preacher, man, he just all over the place today, I don't know how long they're going to keep him before they find somebody else. That all filters through the head of children and young people, the way people talk about the preachers, the Bible school teachers, the other members of the church, all that stuff. It all has an impact on the church. And just, again, to be very blunt, we've ruined it. We've ruined it. The aged men need to be sober-minded. Yes, they shouldn't be drunks, but they need to think like God and think clearly about what's going on in the world. We're not wrestling with flesh and blood. We're wrestling against spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. And if our adversary, the roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour, and we're told to be vigilant, then men need to think like men, not like the world. They need to think about like the man of God. They need to look at things and see things the way they really are. They need to be appalled at many of the things that they see. They need to be touched by the things of the world. We have been made so numb that we just sort of shrug our shoulders and walk away from it. The Jewish people were taught to teach their children when they rise up and when they're going in the way and when they're laying down. Life as a whole was one big educational experience. The good should be lifted up and made an example and taught, and the bad should be used likewise as a reason why you want to live a better life. Look at that person. Not making fun of them, but even Jesus spoke about the rich fool. He didn't use his name, but he talked about him. And he talked about others along the way and examples. Most of the parables that Jesus talked about, I think he could have put a name on it if he wanted to. When he said things like there was a man, or there was this, or there was that, he could have put a name on it because Jesus has been around a long time and he had seen it all, literally. But men need to think soberly in their families, what they're doing, what their families are doing, where they're going, what they're being exposed to, what the effects of those things are. This last generation or two has pretty much had an open faucet to all the dirt and garbage that the world can pile on them through the internet, television. It's just everywhere. We find things here, grave. I find this an interesting word. Grave, by definition, at least from the Greek, is honorable. I ask you, men, are we men of honor? Are we honorable? Should we be honored? Have we done anything worth or worthy of our wives, of our children, of our neighbors, to think about us as people of honor? Do we keep our word? Do we take control of the situations and do the honorable thing? Even sometimes if it's hard, do we do the honorable thing? Are we people who are serious? Or are we clowns? Some people go through their life like they're clowns at a circus. They think they're there just to entertain people, distract, dignified. All these definitions: honorable, reputable, serious, dignified. Does that describe us? You know, it's a question we have to ask ourselves, because we're setting an example. Temperate, we've talked about this before, it's self-control. Men, are we men of self-control? Do we truly control ourselves and our lives? Are we setting an example of what it is not to just do what you want or do what's convenient, but again, having things under control? Sound in faith. One of the first qualifications that Paul gives for an elder is he must be apt to teach. If you're not sound in the faith, you can't teach anybody anything. You're just going to teach garbage. And in the last generation or two in the church, there's been tons of garbage books printed, but there has not been enough of the books from good, sound scholars like there used to be. And sadly, due to the accreditation in all of our universities, they throw away the good books and fill the libraries with the junk books. They throw away the steak and replace it with bubble gum and certs. Because people don't know enough about the Bible to actually teach something that is solid. And because of that, again, men, we're not qualified for elders. We're not qualified for deacons. We shouldn't be qualified for preachers. We ought to be people who are sound in faith. There's three things here we're supposed to be sound in. One is faith. The other, he says, that we ought to be sound in is charity. In being loving and nurturing and caring and interested in the affairs of everybody else, not to nose around in their business, but to try to make sure that people don't fail as Christians. So that's why a man gets qualified to be an elder, is because he's apt to teach, he has temperance, he is a person of honor, he exudes a sense of charity and caring for others, and that they also ought to be sound in patience. Parenting, adulthood is not for the weak of heart. You have to grow up. I was thinking about the other day, I was going back through the hall at the house, and I remember as a child that hall seemed so long, and when the lights were off, I was scared to death to go back there that hall. I made them get up and go turn the light on at the end of the hall before I would go back to the bathroom. No matter how bad I had to go, somebody had to turn the light on before I'd go, because I was just too scared to walk back that hall. Well, again, children are scared, but there comes a time when we have to put away the childish things. We got to grow up. Whether we're afraid of the dark or whatever it is, we have to take a stand. We have to be strong. As it comes into verse 3, it says, aged women likewise. Yes, Paul started with the men. Most of the time we start with the women. Men got theirs first. Paul said that the aged women likewise be in behavior as becometh holiness. Oops. That's the best thing we can say. Speech, actions, dress. Where do we want to go? We could spend hours. Holiness. Holiness is a state of being closer and closer and closer to God and to purity. Not being influenced by the things of the world, not influenced by their style of clothing that's inappropriate. There's some of the clothes are fine, but some of them, again, I just don't know. But one thing does not ring true in my mind when I see some of the outfits. Holiness, at least with that kind of holiness, might spell it with a W. There's a lot of W's with that kind of hole in places they probably shouldn't be. But again, young women have to have somebody to set an example for them. Somebody to clear the path for them, to show them how that they ought to behave, how they ought to act. And it's not just about, having to sit down and have a good talk. We're going to have that talk. We're going to have a talk of holiness today. They should have already seen that in the way in which their mother and their grandmothers, it's not just one person, it's the way the grandmother was, the way that the grandmother raised her daughter, the way the daughter raises her daughter, the way the daughter raises her daughter, with the concept of the idea of being a lady. And we talk about men being honorable. And we might here insert the fact as those who behave holiness as being a lady. Our world doesn't even have a clue what it means to be a lady anymore. They know what it is to be a Marine or a sailor because I can hear some of them and the way they talk and the way they dress and the way they act. But what about holiness? They need to pattern, to show holiness, what behavior as becometh holiness. Just as much as we talk about the things that become sound doctrine. He used that word again, that becomes holiness, that supports it, complements it, gives it an opportunity to be displayed, not false accusers. And that comes in many flavors, but if you didn't see it, then you really don't know about it, and you shouldn't be talking about it. And if you saw it and you know about it, you probably still shouldn't be talking about it, whether it's false or whether it's true, but especially things that you don't know, that you don't understand. Gossiping in those situations does not become holiness. Not given to much wine. It's pretty much what it says. Doesn't mean mom sometimes don't need a glass of wine. Sometimes she might need one. We all deal with things in stressful ways, but not given to wine. Teachers of good things. The mother of the house should be a teacher of good things. What are you talking about? If you don't know, then you need to be studying. Good things. They need to teach what are the good things to do, the beautiful things to do, the things that a young man should be doing. Mothers have great influence over their sons and also their daughters, but fathers have that same influence too. Bring your children up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, teaching good things. Oh, we don't want to do that. You don't want to wear that. You don't want to buy that. You don't want to wear that to school. You need to be teachers of good things. No, you are not going to wear that to church. I don't care what everybody else is doing. No. I have an opportunity to drive by Koontz quite often for various things now that I'm living in town. I don't know. Sometimes I see women standing out front of Koontz, and I'm not sure if they're there doing business or if they're there to mourn. The clothes I see them wearing into the funeral home does not look like something that a woman that's going to mourn someone should have on. If you leave very little to the imagination and perhaps don't even leave anything to the imagination, that's not a good thing. Mothers need to teach their daughters. They need to teach their sons. They need to teach their children. I don't care this house does not care what the neighbors do. This house does not care what everybody does at school. This house cares about what God thinks and what the Bible says. And based upon that principle, you're going to wear this. You're going to act like that. You're going to be a young man or young woman of honor and dignity. And that has to be taught. It has to be taught. That they may teach the young women to be sober. Since they're supposed to be not given to much wine, and they're supposed to have a clear head and clear thoughts, they need to teach that to the younger women also. You need to be responsible. You need to look at your house and look at your children and look at your family and understand that if you don't help take control of it, you're going to lose it. Many marriages end in divorce because there is no commitment. There's not an understanding of what marriage is, and most certainly marriage cannot run on autopilot. And if you can't grasp that, when the wheels fall off, I think all of us understand that you have to change oil in a car. You have to rotate the tires. You have to check the tread. And if you don't, and you're going up the road and you lose the engine or the tires fall off, it's because of your neglect, and you have to accept that. See, this is adulting. We don't have a lot of that today. I see grandmothers who are, again, dressing and acting like their teenage grandkids, and they want to be their buddy and pal rather than to be the leader of the family, the matriarch, or as the men, the patriarch of the family. It has a great burden and a great responsibility to love their husbands, to love their children. Now, when I was looking at this, I thought, well, he's going to throw the agape word in there. He's going to do that divine love kind of thing. No. The aged women need to teach their daughters how to be a friend of their husband. Your husband, your wife should be your best friend. And if they're not your best friend, you've got some problems. I encourage people to marry their best friend, someone who really and truly cares what happens to them. That even at difficult times, we're still friends, and we're going to do everything possible to keep this friendship going. Oh, there's much more to it than that. I understand that. But there's a relationship here. And sometimes friendship needs to be learned. It's a give and take, just like friendship. You may not necessarily want to do this or agree with that, but you're willing to give a little, take a little, work a little because you're friends. It's important. To love your children. I had to be careful about that. And it's the same word. It's phileo, which means friendship, brotherly kind of love. And so, we have to learn to love our children. Children are obnoxious little creatures. They come in the world obnoxious, and as long as they're our kids, they stay obnoxious. And we have to acknowledge that. They come in screaming and kicking and crying, and I'm not even going to go into the rest of the stuff that we have to put up with in those first few years. And it doesn't get any better. And you have to accept that. This one belongs to you. So you've got to get a relationship with that child going. You've got to show that child that you love it, you care for it, and that has to be taught. Some of them are easy and some of them are more difficult to love. And that's where temperance and all these other things we've been talking about for weeks come into play. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's not out there. It's in our own lives. And if you seriously think about what the Apostle Paul is telling Titus here, you'll understand why I say the church needs to get an F. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but the church in general probably needs a big F. And again, you understand what happens when you went home with a report card full of F's. Just think what it's going to be like to stand before Jesus and your report card be filled with F's. Marriage, F. Family, F. Community, friendships, relationships, F. Well, you pretty much know what's going to happen when you stand before Jesus. And when he sends you to the woodshed, you're going to stay. Here we have a chance to fix it, and that's why Paul's telling Titus, fix it. You who are adults, be adults, fix it. Be the examples. Teach the younger, not just by words, but by example. And you know what? If you bring your children up right, you do that, what we're talking about here, they see that modeled, and they want to pretend. Little girls, they want to, again, most of the time have their doll babies, and, they want to be like their mommy was with them, and they want to take care of the baby. But again, the first lesson of how to be a mommy was taught to them by their mother and how they took care of them. One of the things we're told over and over again is abusive husbands and abusive wives generally come from families where their fathers, mothers were abusive to each other and to them. Abusers make abusers because that's all they know. If daddy slaps mommy in the face every time she says anything, I'll slap anybody in the face anytime I don't like what they say. If it's okay for daddy to pick mommy up and throw her across the living room, that's what a man does. It's no wonder these little kids that are watching all this stuff, all these little kids who've raised themselves. We have a generation now that's basically raising itself. They've lived in grab you a juice when you get up of a morning, grab you a juice box out of the refrigerator. There's Pop-Tarts in the pantry. Your shoes are here, your clothes are there, and they pretty much raised themselves. When you come home, there's stuff in the freezer, fix your supper. They're absentee landlords. Parents have abdicated their authority. The school system has picked up on that and indoctrinated children. It's no wonder the church is messed up. And it's not something that just happened overnight. It's been in a process for a long time. Love your husbands, love your children, be discreet. The word discreet there isn't sneaky. It just means, again, to be a sound mind. Chaste. And if you don't know what that word means, you need to be studying. It's what it means to be a lady. A lady doesn't do this. Sadly, by the time most people are married, there is nothing that they don't already know about each other. It's a big difference between a biblical wedding, when we're talking about Joseph and Mary and all those kind of things. Yeah, wedding today and dating and all that goes with it's much different than the Bible would even tolerate. Most of what is called dating today should have a different name to it. It's called fornication. Creating lust and evil desires, and then going further and satisfying that. To be keepers at home, and that doesn't mean stay at home, but it means that they're responsible for the home. It is the woman's responsibility, Paul says, to see that those four walls, that is a house, is made into a home. A place where her and her husband are able to have that loving, caring relationship, that the world is kept out of that relationship, where when their children are born, it will be a place of nurturing and caring, and she is the keeper of the house. While it may include sweeping the floors, it goes way beyond that. That's just the minor stuff. She is the one who pulls and holds the house together. She is the keeper of the home, the thing that holds it all together. You can't get somebody else to do that. You can hire a housekeeper to run the sweeper, but you can't hire someone to be the keeper of the home. That comes from the relationship of the husband, the wife, wanting to have a family and be a home. Good. Word good there is translated profitable, generous, upright, virtuous. I just give and give and give and give. It just wears me out. It's being generous. It's being good. If I have to do this one more time, I just don't know what I'll do. You go ahead and do it because you're generous. You want to give more and more and more. And there was a lady that I knew, and a lot of my life is motivated by, things that I've seen and people that I've admired, and I won't use her name, but she was very generous. She was very loving, very caring. Her family was her life. It's not that she didn't have a job and that she didn't work, but her family was her life. And, she was very generous to her family. Admirable in the things which she did. She was upright, virtuous. Young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works. Son, you can't act like that. Peer pressure, if there's going to be peer pressure, you're the one that's going to be influencing people, and it's not going to be like that. I don't care if the rest of your friends are doing this or that. You're going to set an example of what it is to be a godly young man. And if you don't, then I'll teach you what it is to not be a godly young man, what the results of that is. Whether that means extra chores, whether that means something else to build character in you, if it means you don't get a driver's license till you're 80 years old, I don't care. But you are going to be a young man, an example to your class. I don't care if they laugh at you, and you shouldn't either. And so it's important from the very earliest points in life to get people to understand that there's more that we're dealing with than just what people feel and believe and think. In doctrine showing uncorruptness, line for line. Timothy, a young man who followed the Apostle Paul, he told him, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Gravity, majesty, dignity, serious. Sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. As we finish here this morning, I want you to think about what the church would be like if the church was like what it's supposed to be. Not what it is, but what it's supposed to be like. Some of you are old enough to probably know when the church was like that. And the church is different today. It's a lot different. There's always been problems and there's always been shortcomings, and that's why we have to have interventions occasionally as parents and leaders of the church and everything else. But if the church is to have any impact upon the world, it has to start in our own lives. It has to start in our own homes, in our congregations. We need to be people who are setting an example of what it means to be a Christian.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you.